and welcome to Rainbow History Class, the queer and trans history that you probably don't get in school. My name is Rudy Jean Rigg.
My name is Hannah McElhinney. Thanks for being with us again.
I know, thank you so much for joining us. Today I am taking you on a adventure about pasta.
Amazing. Okay, when you sent me that hint message last night with just a plate of pasta, some cheese and a eating face, I assumed that it was going to be about Parmesan cheese.
Is that because there's a queer history to Parmesan?
I don't know.
Okay,
I was hoping that there might be and you would tell me this morning. But nevertheless, I'm glad that there's a queer history to pasta. But before we get into it, if you are listening this far, then please take a moment to hit subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. I'm just going to go all out for what I want from you today. And please show us some support on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to this, because it really makes a huge difference to our well-being, but also to help other people find and discover the podcast.
Do you want to know a fun fact, Hannah?
All facts are fun.
We have now got officially 202 5-star reviews on Spotify.
Amazing.
I know, how cute is that?
Please be our 203rd.
Yeah, I want to get to 250. I don't know. It just it feels like a good number to me.
Okay, maybe we can get to 250 this week if we beg. But thank you. Hopefully, while we were ranting on at you, you took time to hit that button. Otherwise, let's get into it.
Today, I am talking to you, or rather sharing the story of the macaroni hysteria and the subsequent public conversations about homosexuality in 18th century Britain.
This is wild. Okay. Wow. Macaroni hysteria.
Do you know about this?
I really don't know about this, but I'll be interested because I personally have a vendetta against a pasta, and I'll be happy to know if there were others that are the same.
Wait, what vendetta against pasta do you have?
Okay, low key. Risotto and orzo just look like maggots to me.
Oh, but do you like eating them? Or
no, because it's like eating do I like eating maggots?
No, but some things slimy, but you'll still eat it. I don't like things that look like slime or yucky, but I eat yogurt,
Yeah, no, I get that, but no, I don't like maggots.
Okay. Wait.
So, yeah.
Is that a pasta? I'm thinking of risotto.
No, risotto is rice-shaped pasta.
Well,
and orzo is that, but slightly bigger. So both fall under the category of maggots to me. And so please tell me if there are some other people throughout history that also don't like a specific type of pasta.
Well, unfortunately, it's quite the opposite is in the case of this story, because this centers around some people who really love macaroni, which is kind of unfortunate if you don't like macaroni. But I thought I'd start off with just letting everyone know the history of macaroni, which I thought would be quite simple. I don't know why, because there's hundreds of different types of pasta, but macaroni has a convoluted history. We're not really sure about its origins, but it could have been in the 11th century.
The 11th century.
The 11th century?
The 11th
Sorry,
century.
I'm not have I ever told anyone that I'm not good at math and numbers? But in the 11th century, for example, pasta was already a really big thing. We had seen pasta in Italy. We'd seen pasta style China, obviously noodles. They wouldn't have called it pasta. Pasta and noodles are different things, despite what Americans think. And the thing was, though, the popularization, I guess, the sharing of pasta across the seas wasn't really happening until a little later. But the academic consensus supports the thinking that the word macaroni, even if it did come from Italy originally, potentially has a derivative in Greek. The word makaria, I think that's probably not how you say it, but that's how it looks, which is a kind of barley broth which was served to commemorate the dead. And when you look at the passage of the word across the, time in Italian, and again, I'm just going to say this how I say it, macaroni refers to just elongated pasta. So it's not.
Hang on.
Yeah.
But macaroni is short.
Well, see, I think it's elongated tubular pasta, but it's not necessarily.
Was spaghetti not invented then?
Well, listen, I wish I could have looked into all of the pasta and made a big pasta chart, but unfortunately I was getting like celiac related hives just like looking at all these photos of macaroni.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm gonna go down that. I'm gonna go down that tube soon.
Please. But what
Okay.
I find interesting though is like we know macaroni as this really specific kind of pasta that's often had with like a cheese based like sauce thing, whereas in like Italy, macaroni is like just like a kind of a collection of pasta. It's just like a broad term for a particular subset of pasta, subspecies, if you will. But it didn't appear in English until in the 1390 like publication of some recipes, which did include one of the first known recipes for macaroni and cheese.
No way, from the 1300s, mac and cheese goes back that far. Oh my God. Do you know that recipe? Like, should we try it? Should we make 1300s mac and cheese?
I kind of want to. I assume it would be quite
you wouldn't be
similar.
able to eat it as a vegan celiac, but I would eat it and I could tell you the flavor profile.
Well, please, that would be good. It would probably be sawdusty, I imagine, and quite like not great, but go ahead. Probably just add some extra salt. So that's kind of the precursor to understanding macaroni as a food. And now we're going to move towards the 18th century, which is really where our story today begins.
Okay.
Now I want to take a quick pivot from food to fashion, which in my mind coexist. But I wanted to talk about what was up with masculinity at the time, because that's also important to the story and understanding the macaroni hysteria.
I feel like, if there's not a masculinity construct to couch a story in, what are we even doing?
I know. And I know it's sounding like I'm all over the place, but I promise you this comes together. And when you realize all
just
of
like
the pieces,
a nice sauce.
It is like a nice sauce. I'm not curdling anything. Just relax. So in the 18th century, so this is the 1700s, because, just as a FYI, because I always get confused with this, the understanding of what it means to be masculine or what it means to be a man, or, that sort of like what were gender stereotypes doing at the time, it's important to understand that it was during particularly like the beginning, or like not even like the mid 18th century, that particularly in Britain, the understanding of masculinity was becoming more rigid and it was more closely policed than in previous centuries. And this is really where we get the beginning of what we understand in a modern sense of like heteronormativity. So like they had stopped wearing heels, as we spoke about last week, like men weren't really wearing heels anymore because like the plumbing was better and shit wasn't on the streets.
Aqueducts.
The aqueducts off in full force.
Full force. It was a metropolis of aqueducts.
It was. They had men had stopped wearing any sort of makeup. Like there was
boring.
I know it was becoming quite boring, quite rigid. Men's tailoring had changed, that sort of thing. So in that sense, we understand that like men were becoming boring. Okay. They were losing their riz.
Thank you. I am oriented in time. This is when men get boring.
Now in Britain, there was a couple of slang words that were used a lot to articulate either maybe a heteronormative man and a non-heteronormative man, aka a boring and an interesting man. So the first one were, let's talk about a boring man. They were called rakes.
I'm sorry, why does that give me suave twink energy?
Because they kind of were, but not twinks. So to be a rake, you were aggressively masculine. So you were very much inhibiting and living and breathing that up-to-date men's culture vibe.
Rudy, we need to bring this back. We need to bring the rakes back.
I know. I want to be called a rake. Like if I was called a rake, I'd be like, damn right, I'm a rake.
Yeah,
like,
I'm not a bro. I'm not a dude. I'm a rake.
Maybe this is going to solve all your problems about wanting to be like one of the guys.
Yes, I'm one of the rakes.
Yeah.
I know. Fall is my favorite season.
To be a rake, though, just so you understand what you have to do, you have to become closely associated with vices of the time, which included drinking, gambling, and quote unquote whoring, which I believe was a popular term for people who engaged with sex workers. So I'm like, that's straight from the history books, people.
All right.
So that's on one side of the spectrum. On the other side, we have what we'd like to call fops, which is very British.
You don't want to be a fop.
You don't, well.
When you can be a rake.
Yeah. When you've got to choose between the two. Fops as a word, or a fop as I guess like a slang term, became first popularized in the Restoration period, which off the top of my head was earlier than what we're talking about. So it had already been around for a while. Now it described a man who was effeminate. And what does effeminate really mean? Well, according to this, they were vapid and enervated men who were likened to weak and feeble women. So maybe you don't want to be called a fop, because even though you might be a proud fop, it's pretty much just used as an insult. So that was the slang terms that were being used at the time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no. I mean, yeah. Fops, it's just not that good.
Well, no, it doesn't have a ring to it. Like, rakes really assert something. Like, there they go again, the rakes.
Exactly. We need a better name for the fops.
Maybe it's just our Australian accent.
It could be.
I don't know.
Fops. That's the French one.
Is it?
No, I don't know.
So here's what's important to understand about these terms during this period in time, because as it'll become more clear later in the story, when we talk about someone who is effeminate and someone who perhaps in a modern sense could be a twink, or be described as a twink and actually be someone who is gay or queer. At the time, that wasn't the case. The association between being maybe someone who inhibits a twink style stereotype wouldn't have been associated with like potentially like gay subculture or gay culture or homosexual culture at the time.
It was just like weak.
Well, yeah, it was just like weak and bad. They had not made the connection socially or culturally between someone who's weak and then someone who's gay.
Yeah.
So they were different ideas. And in that sense, it's important to understand that in the words of Susan Staves, she says that the effeminate fop was not some sort of proto-homosexual, but rather a kind of new man.
A metrosexual.
Yeah, basically.
Wow, the post-restoration metrosexual.
Yeah. And she goes on to say the so-called effeminacy of these old fops was an early, if imperfect, attempt at the refinement, civility, and sensitivity most of us would now say are desirable masculine virtues.
Right.
And then to cap off her thinking, she said a queer quality had, however, crept into some uses of the word fop by the mid-18th century, particularly when employed in association with the term macaroni.
Wow.
So
you've brought it together. You know what you've just done with the story? It's like when you add a little bit of the pasta water to the sauce to emulsify. You've emulsified the stories.
Yes.
Okay, I'm on board. I'm on board. All right.
So we've got fops, we've got rakes, and now enter the macaroni. What is the macaroni, people?
I don't know. I feel like it's a dance that starts. No, that's the Macarena.
So no, it is the Macarena. Although to be honest, I feel like those words are interchangeable, like in my mind. Anyway, the macaroni is a social stereotype. It's a slang term for another social stereotype. And the macaronis, as they were called, represented an extreme form of male fashion in the 1770s in particular. And what were they wearing, you may ask? Well, I can tell you.
Oh my God, not macaroni necklaces.
God, I wish. They probably did.
They could have.
Like just as a joke. They were wearing huge, high-sat powdered wigs topped with minuscule hats, face powder and rouge. They had long swords, elaborate lace ruffles, and tight, colourful silk suits. So they were very like camp. And I say camp because they were British and they took this style of Rococo dress from not only France, but Italy. And the reason they took it from Italy is because one of the key components of being considered a macaroni is your passion for foreign culture.
I think I'm a macaroni.
Do you like traveling?
I like traveling. I also happen to love large wigs with tiny hats on them.
Something about that is just so class.
Because I think that's the point. Because when we look back at actually the idea of like camp as a concept and like a philosophical movement. Now the word camp is applied to everything. However, camp has always referred to form over function. So the idea of a tiny hat is so inherently camp because a hat, to fulfill its function, to protect your face from the sun, needs to be bigger than your head.
Yeah.
So a tiny hat is the ultimate in camp.
I mean, and add a sword and Bob's your uncle. Like, why are these people? No one's needing a sword in like civilian Britain. I
bet you they couldn't use it. And that is like twink chic.
Yeah. Something about these people were really, really something. Now, I bet you're sitting there thinking, God, did they have a club? Did they have a club? Because I would like to join. Well, they freaking did. Maybe. This is where my rabbit hole kicked off because I don't know how I got onto it. I think that I was like trying to Google like queer foods because I was just like, I must have been hungry. It was around dinner time. And I came across the Macaroni Club. So this is really where this all began. Now, the Macaroni Club was something that potentially existed, though it may not have, and it may have become mythologized. And it was it was referenced quite a few times, but the source reference for the Macaroni Club is in a letter that Horace Walpole wrote. He was a writer and art historian. It was a letter dated the 6th of February, 1764, and he was addressing it to the Earl of Hertford. And he was just like, I don't know, talking shit.
And that reminds me of like when you had letters, right?
Yeah.
You had like, did people talk shit in their letters? Because all the letters that have survived, or as anyone placed any kind of importance on, have like a clear point. It's either information or like your deepest thoughts, or love, or that kind of thing. When did we start shit talking? And it must have been when we got to correspond much more quickly.
Well, I do know that the concept of gossiping is like one of the earliest forms of like communication, like in storytelling. So in that sense, I'm so sure that there are letters that are just full of bullshit and that we have like retrospectively taken very seriously, which is kind of the case of this, but like it just gets a bit more inane. So this guy, Horace, he's talking to the Earl of Hertford, and he says the Macaroni Club, brackets, which is comprised of all the travelled young men who wear long curls and spying glasses. So he is just talking about these guys. I don't know if this Horace Walpole is like a fan of the macaronis or he's like actually shit talking them, but he's telling his mate about them. And
oi, get this.
And in retrospect, people think that this club never existed because there's actually no like historical evidence that it did. Although my counterpoint to that is that, well, maybe it was a secret club.
I don't understand. This comes up literally every episode where certain historians, gatekeepers of academia, will question the validity and existence of secret clubs based on no evidence. But any good secret club doesn't leave a trace.
Well, that's the thing. So I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to think about it, but I just really hope that it existed. I will say, though, that this letter and this guy must have been yapping on about it like more than just in this letter, because the term Macaroni Club or the concept of a club like this existing did end up permeating into the public imagination in the 1770s.
All because of old mate Horace.
Well, I think that he used the word club to just sort of like as like a collective noun.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, like I'm thinking that the word club was was kind of used as a collective noun generally. And so I think that there probably would have been other people calling the macaronis like the Macaroni Club when talking about it in like a group sense. So from this, like, there was a bunch of like satirical, like political, like drawings drawn of them, and the term macaroni really grew from there. And I thought it was interesting because a researcher pointed out that one of the things that came up about the macaronis when talking at the time when talking about the language, calling them macaronis, was because they loved foreign cuisine and they had been to Italy and they'd come back to Britain being like just obsessed with macaroni as a pasta and a meal, which was super foreign to Britain and Brits at the time. And some saw that as a political stance against the Rakes, the popular like form of masculinity at the time.
Imagine taking down the patriarchy with macaroni.
Well, yes, and especially when you consider that it was potentially against roast beef, because that was the popular food and men loved roast beef. And if you're wondering if there was a counterpart club against the macaroni club, I can tell you that there was in fact a beefsteak club. And if it wasn't just called the Beefsteak Club, it's called the Sublime Society of Steaks. And it's a genuine...
Why is this so funny? This is so funny because...
I knew you would find this so funny.
This is what dudes do. Okay, have you... You know the series of unfortunate events?
Yeah.
Okay, this is the most Count Olaf coded story that I've ever heard, but I love it. It's like these well-traveled, tiny hat-wearing, pasta-loving men come in and then they threaten the establishment of the Rakes.
Yeah.
The real men who are like, what? Pasta?
Yeah.
We're going to make our own club.
Yeah.
And it's the Sublime Society of Beef.
Yeah. So that's this is so something that Andrew Tate would do.
It is.
Like Donald Trump's like, they want a club about macaroni. Oh, well, we have our own. And
Our club is about real men and beef.
Boating, camping, fishing, move over. Sublime Society of Steaks in. They were a genuine dining club founded in 1735 by a man named John Rich, and he was the manager of the Covent Garden Theatre. This club still exists. And I implore anyone to either join it and report back, or if you are already a part of this illustrious club, I would love to know some inside information.
One of our classmates who lives in the UK maybe suss this for us, head along and see if you're able to join the secret society of Sublime Steaks.
I would love to.
But the Macaroni Club's not here.
No, well, see, that's the thing, that this is where I think people in the public at the time were getting confused, because they were like, oh my God, this real club about steak-loving men exists. Does this macaroni thing exist or does it not? And so it became like just very conjecture heavy, and like, you know, it became mythologized from the very start, particularly with all this like political satire and illustrations that were happening.
Wait, so I feel like so this is really funny, because to me it's like this is the kind of Trump vibe of it, where it's like the men come in, the Rakes are like, you got a club? We got a club. Ours is about steak. And then the twinks, the macaroni twinks, are like, we might have a club. And they're like, you have a club? You want to see our club? Let me see your club. Our club's bigger and better. And they're still, we might have a club.
Yeah. I love the coyness of it.
Yeah.
Because I do wonder, and this is what I couldn't really find, whether like in response to being told that they had a macaroni club when it didn't actually exist, I wonder if the macaronis did in fact form a club to be like, oh, guys, I guess we got to do it now.
Yeah. Now we're stuck. We've got to keep up appearances.
Yeah. So that's...
Wait.
You just need another minute?
I just need one pun.
Okay, please go.
Do you think that the way when they reported on the Macaroni Club, did they say, sources say... sources confirm the existence of a macaroni club?
Oh my God.
Okay.
I do like that.
That's my pun. All right, move on.
My one would be pasta la vista, baby. We're losing men to the Italians.
All right, we need to move past to this.
Okay. Oh, you're gonna keep coming up with them now. Okay. So we understand what is happening now. There's a many illustrious club in Britain. People are traveling, they're coming back, and they're becoming these new kind of men. Homosexuality, though, is still separate to this because homosexuality was considered an act and not an identity, which is really important to understand. But it was around this time where the macaronis as a social stereotype was peaking that the merger between, I guess, social stereotypes and identities and the act of whatever you were doing in your bedroom was coming together and forming like a kind of a ball of stigma.
A ball of stigma.
A ball of stigma. We all have one. So the implication of the macaronis was that they had not merely like fallen prey to quote unquote foreign vanity that other societies and cultures held as, you know, important things in their everyday life. In particular, like say, for example, like women's fashion, you know, like men in other cultures, like there was sort of more, and like the lines between masculine dress and feminine dress were a little bit more androgynous. But Brits thought that these macaronis were not just bringing over those sorts of foreign cultural bits. They thought they were bringing over other things that Italians, for example, had, you know, deep set in their culture was homosexuality. So they thought, oh God, like they're not just bringing back these tiny little hats and silly wigs, they're bringing back gay. So
that's where gay comes from.
Italy. Confirmed.
Oh my gosh.
So
I didn't know I had Italian roots.
This is where it's like the butterfly effect, right? I feel, because it's like at this point in time, they are starting to think, okay, is being gay or being queer, being homosexual, is that just an act that people are doing that are separate from their public life and their public appearance and how they interact and blah, 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 blah? Or is it something that is connected? And this is some of the conversations that were happening. And an event that happened that I will tell you about, which is why I said, Hannah, before we started recording, I think it needs its own episode. I think, and this is what some other historians say, is that this is what kind of merged and was the kind of final nail in the coffin between pulling homosexuality away from just being an act and towards something that was already postulated in the public to be perhaps a negative thing.
Yep.
That being the macaroni.
Because researching around this time, the idea was that, and this is like what I've always found funny, was that sodomy, which was the act,
yes,
was something that anyone could succumb to if they weren't careful enough. So it's like, you know, when you're just like tripping and then just like end up having anal sex.
Yeah.
And that is something that could befall us all, and it didn't really mean anything much about you apart from like it was another vice-like behavior that you should keep a lid on to get into heaven. But yeah, then it becomes a bad thing and associated with a type of person later, which is what you're talking about. Yeah.
Like that's exactly right. And I think that's kind of where like this all sort of started, because what was happening at the time, sodomy was, yes, something that anyone could find themselves engaging in. And then when you look at what was happening with the macaronis, they had gone from just like being a fashion style and someone that was like culturally interested in like foreign things to, by the 1760s, the public sentiment of macaronis was that the read of the fashion that they engaged with and the read of the culture and stuff that they were into was inherently meant that they were probably not interested in women, or potentially like not interested in women at all. And therefore women, and I say this in a general sense, stopped being attracted to that kind of man. Like it was not a good thing to be attracted to a macaroni as a woman, because
you're barking up the wrong tree.
You're barking up the wrong tree. We can't trust these macaronis. They're kind of anti-British. Like that kind of sentiment was building. So there was these two forms of tension at the time, I think, at least in this little bubble that we're talking about, that was kind of really at odds with each other. or at least they were kind of like up, like magnets that kept flipping from like the opposite end to the right end. So it was like just lots of things are happening. There was a lot of social tension. So without getting into, you know, the deep, I guess, history of sodomy, because I think what?
Sorry. No, I was being a child. I was being
Okay.
an actual child without getting deep into the history of sodomy.
I don't want to go deep into that cavern because because
I'm a grown up.
Because it needs its own episode, because it's very nuanced, and I don't want to sit here and couch it in the macaronis, because that's just, you know, I think it needs to be done separately so we can talk about it in a wide sense.
Yep.
I'm just going to move on, because there's nothing that I can say or describe that's not going to make it sound like a bad pun. So these are the tensions we're dealing with. Now,
Right.
We've reached the pinnacle of Macaroni Mountain. We're at the summit.
Oh my God.
It's macaroni hysteria. And it's at this peak hysteria about what makes a man, what is a man, what should a man wear, what should women be interested in a man, like blah, 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 that I believe it's like popping a zit, and the zit has just come out, and what's come out at the top of the zit? The
Macaroni.
first macaroni.
Cheese.
No, it's worse. The first public debate about homosexuality in England. I know. And if you're thinking they hadn't talked about this before, what about Oscar Wilde? Oscar Wilde didn't have his whole moment in the sun for another 100 years. So this is 100 years before Oscar Wilde. So keep that in mind, because I thought that there would have been many other cases of the conversation of homosexuality in the public domain. But as we've discovered now, it wasn't really, it was just an act. It wasn't an identity. It wasn't something to be concerned with.
It was
other
like
people.
theft.
It was like theft. It was like a petty crime, if that. So
Something to keep a lid on, not be terrified of.
yeah, exactly. Like it was like, do it in your own homes. Just like, you know, be polite about it, whatever. So enter Captain Robert Jones.
Mm-hmm.
Just, I don't know. When I think of him, I picture a man with like a red jacket on, like a big hat, like a feather in his hat. I don't know, kind of like a pirate-esque guy.
Yeah, in my mind, he's like a proto David Bowie.
Yeah, could you might regret saying that.
Yeah, keep in mind that I don't know the rest of this story, so let's see if my likeness to David Bowie holds.
I don't know.
What does this man do?
Well, he was convicted for sodomizing a young boy, and he was sentenced to hang.
Okay.
So I'm not going to comment on the David Bowie thing.
Okay. Well, maybe there's a few likenesses there. I'm not sure.
Potentially. Now, if this wasn't already sort of public news, because he was like a captain, it was like a kind of a big deal. He had actually been able to obtain a royal pardon in the October of that year. So he was sentenced in July. He was convicted and sentenced in July. And by the time October had rolled around, he had been like, please, I didn't do anything wrong. Please just pardon me. And old mate, the Queen, whoever, said, yeah, okay, fine. But on one condition, you've got to leave the country.
Okay.
And so that was fine. The pardon was received. He received a lot of accusations in response to the pardon, and there was even a wider discussion about potentially an established a kind of a cover up in the sort of British Parliament.
Mm-hmm,
you know, that they were like, oh my gosh, like, you know, this is a notable man. Like they've probably just covered it up to like make everything look good. But it was that to me doesn't really stand up, because the reason he was notable was because he popularized skating and fireworks. And I'm like, if that's really what's important to whoever's running the country, I think that they need to go to do some professional
Skating
development.
as in skateboarding?
I think ice skating, to be
Ice skating, yeah, okay, skating and fireworks.
Well, see, this is the thing as well, like, and just because I do want to shit on him a little bit, he popularized the quote unquote art of fireworks, which I thought people in China had been perfecting for hundreds of years previously.
I'd say that. I thought that too.
So I just want to point that out, that he has stolen someone's work and not given them credit. And he's
Sounds like A colonizer.
Yeah, very I'm getting the colonizer vibes. And so this had surmounted in a lot of press being done about it. The PR was strong. He was getting slandered left, right, and center. And it was this one particular article that really, I think, brought together being homosexual and being a macaroni and brought it to a place where it became this like entangled, hated sort of thing. And the letter that was published in the Public Ledger on August 5th, potentially of the year after, potentially in 1772, I don't have the exact date down, read as follows. This military macaroni was too much engaged in every scene of idle dissipation and wanton extravagance. So sodomy was insinuated here. And it was insinuated in a way that read that it was not just a secret vice of an individual, but it had been so closely like associated in this piece of writing that people took it to be a defining characteristic of someone who is a macaroni, or maybe we understand as like a dandy now.
Some people ruin it for everyone.
Yeah.
Like the macaronis, okay, leave them be. This one person comes in and, you know, assaults a child, and then all of a sudden all the macaronis are painted with the same brush.
Well, that's a thing in like a lot of historians, and I think that like, you know, I know you've spoken about this before. When it comes to like the debate of like, can you separate the like the crime he did from being a crime of homosexuality or a crime of pedophilia? It's hard to like, in a modern sense, particularly because like I'm not like a studied historian, like to be able to say which is like more important.
Well, yeah,
like,
which did they find?
Well, they found the homosexuality worse.
Worse, yeah.
So that's the thing. And it's like, I'm literally not here saying that like, you know, we should excuse the pedophilia because that was just fucking terrible, like full stop. But at the time, the coverage of it was about the homosexuality. However, because that people still were kind of becoming more modernized in their understanding of like relationships, this pedophilic act that did occur within this crime, some people were not happy with that either. So this is where you get that connection between, oh, gay people are pedophiles.
Yeah, and I think that was the thing as well. Like when you look at cases like this, they're always considered so much worse if they're same sex, and they are bad. Like I think that's the thing when we go through history, we look at this type of thing and we say like categorically that is predatory and, you know, morally completely wrong. What is rarely brought into that picture is the age in which young girls were married off.
Yeah.
And so I think it's one of those balanced things when you look at it, you're like, no, objectively it's wrong, but like we also need to say like morally by our standards, you shouldn't be marrying off 12-year-old girls either. There was, I believe, and I would need to check, but I believe a little later legislation came in to raise the age of consent.
Yes, this was kind of like a debate at the time.
At the time.
Yeah.
So this was like the beginning, okay, of the age of consent idea, in which case that makes it easier for the media of those times to report on like where the crime was.
Yeah. And like in this case in particular, like, and this is just like laying the facts down so that people get a broader understanding of it. Like it wasn't just this like random boy. He had engaged in like paid like sex work with this boy.
Right.
Which is like wrong. Like it's still wrong. But like I think when people talk about this, particularly when you're trying to understand the values and like how society was functioning at the time and what was happening, like that's I think important to know, because that will lead you down the path of understanding and learning more about the age of consent. And like I know I had a friend who was doing a PhD on whether kids, like when the concept of childhood, like when the concept of being a kid was developed in like Britain. And I never like asked her. I should ask her. But like, yeah, so I do think it's really interesting. But like, it's just pedophilia is bad, and it's always, it doesn't matter what's period of time. It's just bad.
Yeah. And I feel like
that's
it's very Oscar Wilde by the sounds of it. You know, the Rent Boys of London was such a big thing because it was a way that impoverished people could earn money. So it again is all about power.
Yeah, exactly. Now, when we're thinking about this case, obviously papers were publishing it. And just to be clear, and this is what was pointed out by a lot of researchers when I was looking at this, was that it wasn't just something that was popular and big news in the aristocratic parts of Britain. This case permeated right down into people who were, barely literate, really. So, like, for whatever reason, being literate and being able to read wasn't really a concern because, at this point in time, laborers were going to pubs and having newspapers read to them. So you had like a lot of society being across this case, which is why people state it as being the first public debate of homosexuality, because it was the first time that this topic had reached a class below the aristocratic class.
Yeah.
And it was, and therefore, like, people below the aristocrats felt like they could weigh in, particularly because it was a guy in an authoritative position who got a pardon from the Queen. I don't know if it was a king. Yeah. So the coverage in these newspapers about homosexuality were kind of like all over the place, to be really honest, like much like we see today. There was simple stereotypical like homophobia, like, saying that it was just people who were homosexual were sinners and that they were going to hell and we need to stop this if we want to be saved, blah, 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 to more, I guess, more complex attitudes, which included like even a defense of homosexuality on the grounds that it was a natural trait. So things like that were being talked about in the papers. They were getting to people who weren't just like wearing these tiny little hats.
Something that I want to give our ancestors of the past credit for is I think sometimes we have this idea of people in, well, the centuries ago, and their lives were very dominated by religion, and they did live quite rule-oriented, God-fearing lives. I think so often we paint the people of the past as kind of stupid.
Yeah.
Or like unable to think for themselves, or that they would just kind of default to the Bible or didn't kind of like wrestle or question any of the things to do with kind of morality and religion that we contend with today. But the reality is throughout all of history, even now, you'll if you've been raised in a religious environment, there might come a time where you start to engage with that religious doctrine a bit more critically. You start asking a bit more questions. There might be part of it that resonate with you, other parts that don't resonate with you, and you're kind of like muddling your way through to find this kind of ethical compass to navigate your life with. Well, it was the same throughout different parts of history. And I know that I've been guilty of just being like, oh, they just hated all of the gays, or, they just kind of cared about those kind of conservative stereotypical beliefs. Actually, it's just not true. They would have had debates about whether or not, homosexuality was natural. Yeah,
exactly. And I think like to that point, it's interesting because like they weren't even using the term homosexuality. I think when we think about it, we're like, oh, homosexuality is a term. Like that's just what we've always used because like it's so like Latin based. Like no. The term that they were using in these papers and in these articles was sodomite. So there was still a really heavy association with it being a biblical thing. Is that correct? Yeah, I'm not being correct. Yeah. Okay. I was like, have I got that really wrong?
Yeah.
No.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah, that's it. That Dorian Electra song.
Yeah, that's what it's from.
Yeah. And so the term homosexuality just for everyone's memory, did not appear until 1892. So this is like 100
Hungarian.
Years. Yeah. What? Hungarian?
Yeah. Karl Marie Kurt-Benny. He was a Hungarian sexologist who came up with the term homosexuality.
I was like Hungarian, the words Hungarian?
Karl Maria Kurt-Benny, who was a Hungarian journalist and translator, was the first person to coin the term homosexuality.
Yes, thank you. It's like, what's going on? Why are we in Hungary now? So that sort of wrapped up. I mean, as with much of, well, like with a lot of news, things were just
History just tends to wrap up.
History just tends to just finish and go. That's it, boys. I'm clocking off for the day.
Yep.
In the case of Captain Robert Jones, he I think saw out his life fine. I think this kind of just blew over eventually. The macaronis. Really, it didn't catch on like I think the hysteria said that it was going to. And, you know, as we know, if we even just look at fashion history by the late, I would say even by the mid 19th century, like men's clothing in particular had become quite conservative, and we had gone into I guess, well, we're not in the Victorian era yet, but like it was definitely like heading there. So the macaronis were really kind of left into
the last gasp of interesting men.
Well, yeah,
for a
basically.
while.
And Rakes really did reign supreme, unfortunately. So that's, I guess, the closure of the macaroni. So I would love to see people kind of bring it back. To be really honest with you, I would love to see people just saying, like, putting the pasta emoji in their like Instagram bio or something.
I like that as a little flagging device.
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Rudy.
Sure.
What happened to the Fops?
The Fops, I think that really just died out, and it like I think it became sort of a slang term for
kind of a flop.
Like I think it ended up being used as like an undesirable man who had effeminate traits. Like I think that it just continued to be that way. And I think the term
weak or something.
Yeah, and I think the term macaroni, although that was very specific, I think that if someone didn't know the term macaroni, they would call a macaroni a fop.
Okay.
So I guess that it was just I guess that was like the umbrella term.
All macaronis are fops, but not all fops are macaronis.
Yes.
Got it.
So I want to finish off with a fun fact for you, but I do want to test your knowledge. Are you aware of the history of this song, Yankee Doodle Dandy?
I didn't know there was a dandy to the end of it, but you not, well, I know, no. Well, I'm familiar with the tune.
I think, to be honest with you, it is Yankee Doodle, but I've always just said Yankee Doodle Dandy because I feel like that feels better for me to say.
Okay.
So I just want to finish off because it ties back to the words being used, dandy and macaroni. The song Yankee Doodle, it wasn't a pride, like it wasn't a source of pride for Americans originally. It was actually like a satirical, like mockery song that the British was singing at Americans during this like conflict during the, I guess it was in 1875, so 100 years after macaronis were popular. This is, I guess, the last hurrah for the popularized use of macaroni. And we kind of see us move away from using macaroni as a term to describe quote unquote effeminate men and towards the use of dandy as a term to describe them. And this is the lyrics of Yankee Doodle, at least the first two sections of the song. And I'm not going to sing this in tune. I'm going to
I will.
You can sing it after I do it. So the lyrics are as follows. Yankee Doodle went to town, a-riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. And I was always like, this fucking idiot. Like, what is he doing?
Riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Oh my God.
So that use of the word macaroni was like a callback to the macaroni fashion. But more importantly, it was the British making fun of Americans and saying that they were simpletons and like vapid and vain for their consideration of adorning their hat before like being seen in public. And the next stave or whatever you
stanza,
that's what it's called, is such. Yankee Doodle kept it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. Which the last line, I don't know what I want to infer from and with the girls
It
be
literally
handy.
sounds like the Drake-Kendrick Lamar diss battle, but
Yeah.
Britain versus America.
Yeah. And so here we have the use of the word dandy to mean what we know it to mean, like it, you know, dandy, Oscar Wilde. And so you've got the use of the word macaroni and then dandy. So even then they, you know, 100 years later, they're using the word macaroni. It's 100 years. So the meaning has probably, you know, ebbed and erred a bit. So no, it doesn't mean macaroni as we were speaking about it. But in the same way, it's being used to describe someone who's vapid and interested in things that shouldn't matter to a modern man. And then they've doubled down and they've called Americans dandies, which again is just like they're using it as an insult. And so this was originally sung by the British to mock the, you know, American troops. And then the American troops were like, okay, well, we're just going to, I guess, jazz it up in our own way and add like a million other verses and choruses, and it'll become like a source of pride for us. And so I guess, yeah.
America won with that. I'm sorry, but I respect that. That is such a wonderful fact about Yankee Doodle.
I mean, I just think it's funny because like they're just basically, yeah. Well, I guess in a like I don't know, like I can't say this for certain, but when you look at it with a retrospective like lens, like and unintelligent one at that, it's like, they're calling them gay. Like,
yeah, literally.
Like,
I mean, and that's the eternal insult. You know, the funniest thing is the first thing that popped into my head was when you mentioned like, so this is where we go from macaroni to dandy. I was like, oh my God, which connects totally with our Oscar Wilde episode. It's like it's all connected. It's like a rainbow history glass cinematic universe. And then I'm like, oh no, it's literally just history. It's just the universe. It's just Earth.
I mean, you can take a solipsistic approach if you want to.
I
I don't mind.
I can, but this thanks for. I love it. I love it when swathes of time connect on this.
Me too.
Podcast. But thanks so much for telling me that story. I really liked it.
Thank you. I know it was a bit here, there, and everywhere, but I think the macaronis would have loved it, and that's all that I care about.
All I care about is joining the Rakes. I want to know the villain origin story of the Rakes. But no, thank you so much, Rudy. And if you want to stay in touch with the show, which I assume you do, if you want to join our Macaroni Club.
I know, you can head over and join our Discord. I feel like I want to like rename the Discord to the Macaroni Club, but I won't. You can join us over there. You can join us on our Patreon. We do have a free tier, so don't feel obligated to chuck us any coins just yet. Join the free tier. But aside from that, you can obviously find us on Instagram and TikTok. And you know what? If you feel like watching the episode not on Spotify but on YouTube on your TV or something, go ahead and do that because we're over on YouTube as well.
And it is filmed in 4K. So if you want to put that on your TV, you can do that.
Go right ahead.
But until then, I'm going to leave you with a piece of wisdom, and that is, you're correct, trolls. Not everything is gay, but there is gay in everything, including the pasta section of the supermarket.